to talk about how moms can manage career and maternity leave. This is part of our 100 Days of Jobs for Moms series. If you haven't checked that out, be sure to go to the FlexJobs blog and check out our 100 Days of Jobs for Moms. Basically, it's a different blog post with some career advice for moms at all stages of their careers every day for 100 days. And we're not quite halfway through, so there's plenty of good information to come on that. So thank you all very much for coming. And on the line, we have Joseph Terach of Deli. Hi, Joseph.
Hi, Bree. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me as part of your 100 Days of Mom.
No problem. Thanks for coming and providing some great information.
All right.
And we also have Jen Blaze of FlexJobs, who's going to be fielding some questions. So you might communicate with Jen in the background. Hi, Jen. Oops, sorry, I might have caught Jen off guard there.
She's very in the background.
Yep, yeah, very in the background. You might have an answer from her if you have any questions. Speaking of questions, as we go through today's webinar, if you do have any questions that come up, please feel free to put them in your questions box on your GoToWebinar control panel. To view the control panel, you might have to click the little orange arrow, and that'll open up the whole panel, and then you'll be able to see the questions section where you can leave questions. And we'll be fielding those questions throughout the webinar, but also in a Q&A at the end of the webinar. So it'll be about 45 minutes of presentation and 15 minutes of Q&A or so at the end, and we hope to get as many questions in as we can. So feel free to leave your questions throughout the webinar, and hopefully we'll get to them. But without further ado, I'm going to close our poll and turn it over to Joseph.
Okay, thanks again, Bree, and thanks everyone for logging in and attending today's webinar. Today we are talking about tantrum-free career advice for moms returning to work. And actually, before I leap in, let me just introduce myself to you. I'm Joseph Terach. I founded a company called Deli back in 2003. We work with a number of different groups that provide special services for moms. We work obviously with FlexJobs. We've been FlexJobs partners for several years at this point. We work with a national network called Mommies 24/7. We specialize in helping individuals to manage transitions in their work life and their careers, whether they're changing jobs, whether they're changing careers, or returning to work from an extended hiatus. And mothers often fall into several of those categories. It's not unusual that a woman will take time off from her work or career in order to start or continue a family and take care of their children, and at the same time start thinking about, well, when they come back to work, what kind of changes are they going to make, different line of work, different type of career. And so today we're going to be talking about a couple of different strategies on how to do that, to situate yourself as best as possible to make that triumphant return to the workplace, whether it is after just a couple of months off for short-term maternity leave, or whether it's an extended time off with your family. I like to refer to this as tantrum-free career advice, not only for the double entendre effect, but also because every career change is best handled if the individual making it can be free of anxiety, free of concerns about how am I going to do this, how am I going to put my best foot forward, what should I be doing in the interim, before I embark on this new part of my career, whether that's returning to work or starting a career change. And so I'm going to share some specific strategies with you how to do that, whether you're still at work, getting ready for maternity leave, or whether you are already out there, out of work. Okay. So here you are. This is a picture of going back to work. You almost have it all together at this point, but maybe you forgot to look in the mirror one last time before you left your home. This image, I look at the guy on the right and the woman on the left, and I like to think that their surprised look is not so much about, oh my God, she still has the pacifier hanging on her shoulder, but it's how is she doing all this? How is she balancing her her career life and her home life, and kind of keeping it all together as best as she is. And so these are looks of they're impressed. These are looks of awe, not looks of surprise. So we're going to talk about different ways that moms can kind of make this transition back to work whenever you're ready to do that. That's kind of the whole idea here is it's when how do you stay in the loop? How do you stay involved in a way that A, doesn't infringe upon your time with your family, but B, keeps you in the loop to the point that you feel good and ready to come back whenever you're ready to on your own terms. And I kind of want to jump right in here with what I call the big question. Okay, this question is a question that's on the minds of most every employer when they're either interviewing a woman who's coming back from maternity leave or welcoming her back to work. If she's keeping the same workplace. Okay, it's what have you been doing these past and insert whatever amount of time you're going to be out of work. What have you been doing these past 5 weeks, 5 months, 5 years while you were off work and caring for your child. And by the way, this is not only a question that is on the employer's mind, but I find working with women and other career changers, as a matter of fact, who are coming back to work after a period of time off. This is the question that they themselves have. What am I going to say? How am I going to answer this question? What have I been doing while I've been caring for my child? And it almost does sound like a trick question, right? Because the obvious answer is I've been caring for my child or caring for my children, right? That's why they call it maternity leave. But the question is that the very best answer to give? One of Resume Deli's, one of the services that we provide to our clients is mock interviews. We help individuals to prepare for upcoming job interviews. And one part of that training that we do is trying to help our clients figure out the question behind the question. In other words, what's the real question that the interviewer is asking you when they ask you, hey, what have you been doing these past 5 years while you've been caring for your child? And in this case, the real question is, what have you been doing during this time period to improve your place at work, to make yourself a stronger candidate, a better candidate, to make yourself even more valuable to your employer, even though we know, that the main reason you've taken off is to care for your children. So the important thing is to think about what part of your answer is most relevant to them, to the employer, or to the interviewer. And there are several different possible answers, and let's kind of talk through a few of them. One is, I've been doing the mom thing, right? I've been taking care of my child. I've been tending to their needs, having some play dates. And that's probably, for many women, not all, but for many that is the truth of the matter. So why not give the truth? And there's one argument that absolutely says, look, I've had many clients who said, look, I'm not looking to pull the wool over anyone's eyes. This is how I've been spending my time, and it's maternity leave. And if the interviewer or the employer doesn't like that answer, then I'll find one that respects how I've been spending my time. And that is absolutely one legitimate way to look at answering the big question, how have you been spending your time during maternity leave? I'm going to argue, though, that it in most cases is not the answer that is going to get you to the next phase of the interview process. Here's another possible answer. I've been keeping in touch with my colleagues, staying in touch with work, keeping a pulse on things. Maybe you've gone into the office a couple of times. Kind of have to show everyone your child, your baby, and half to actually, see what's going on there and stay in touch, so that you can make your return to work however many weeks or months down the road. That's, I think, a step closer to a good answer. But I would argue that if it is, if you really want to take control of your situation, you want to be able to answer something like this. I've been, advancing my career. I've been developing new skills. I've been taking on new projects and finding different ways to remain relevant, even though I've been out on maternity leave. And, I would imagine, several of you on this call are now rolling your eyes and saying, well, look, that's not, and I wouldn't have gone out on maternity leave, right? Like, the idea was I'm going to take time off of work and come back at a later date. That works, over a short period of time, but if you're going to be out for several months or several years, the idea is to find a way to spend, even if it's roughly a couple of hours a week, doing some very focused activities that is at a level that's comfortable enough to you that it's not, you won't see it as infringing upon time with your family. Rather, you'll see it as a way to stay involved and actually stay in the loop in a way that's going to make you feel really, strong and prepared to go back to work whenever it is that you're ready to do that. So it's kind of some preemptive steps that we're going to be talking about to put you in that pole position. Okay. So now we're going to talk about a couple of different sort of stages of this process. The earliest one is you're expecting, but you're still at work. You're preparing for maternity leave. You've let them know that you're going to be taking leave and that you're pregnant, but you haven't gone out of work yet. And it's a really, really important stage in the process that often gets overlooked for a number of reasons. It's not unusual for, especially if you don't love the work you're doing or you don't love your current employer or something about it, it's a reprieve, right? I mean, not only are you having your baby, but it's an opportunity to, get out of there for a while. And so you might be, there are many individuals, and this is not just women who are pregnant and going on maternity leave. It's anyone who knows that, down the road they're going to be moving. They're going to be leaving a job. They're going to be doing something different. And so they get excited about that, and they kind of mentally check out because, hey, they're leaving soon, and it's an exciting time. I'm strongly recommending that you not let that happen, and that you do a number of different things. That let's talk about these items here to stay connected. This is where you really start to set the groundwork for how your employer, how your colleagues are going to think about you as you're going out on maternity leave. So one thing is to part with employers and your colleagues on good terms. That just means stay focused on your work, stay connected, continue to do your job at a high level, and so on. Don't let them think that you are, let them think that your work is your first priority. And at this point, it's not always possible, but it's often possible for a woman who's pregnant in the workplace to do that. Just stay 100% focused as best you can. The second item here, lead succession planning efforts. What this means is, actually, take the reins and help your employer figure out, okay, while I'm out, here's what I recommend we do, or that the company does, in order to make sure that everything I'm doing, everyone that I'm managing, everything that I'm involved in stays on pace. That the company doesn't lose a beat because I'm going to be going out on maternity leave for however much time. That's a great way to kind of put your stamp on, your position, on your responsibilities, and keep them yours, during the interim period that you're out. It shows that you're really interested in the company's continued success while you're out, and so on. It shows true dedication. So, get involved. Try not to wait for your employer to come to you and say, hey, how are we going to do this? Or even, here's someone else within the company who's going to be leading up the succession planning efforts while you're out. You should try to be the person to do that. In addition to the company's plan, the third item here is, you should identify a detailed plan for how you yourself are going to remain involved, both, during the transition, so before, as you're getting ready to go out on maternity leave, while you're out, and again when you come back. So it's a longer-term plan of here's what I'm going to be doing, and what you'll be doing while you're out on maternity leave is, of course, up to you at the end of the day. But if you can find a way, whether it's after you're home for a while, kind of staying involved just from home, a couple of hours a week, those are, that's a possibility that you might find palatable, and even something that you want to do. Plenty of moms who go out on maternity leave are, they want the freedom to be out, but they also want to stay involved and continue working for any number of reasons. And if you can arrange with an employer to do that on, whether that's a couple of hours a week or even, it could be a couple hours a month, whatever is comfortable for you and workable for your employer that's going to let you stay involved so that you don't, completely cut ties. If it's something you can manage, it's a great way to remain connected throughout your maternity leave. And of course, let your company do some nice things for you if they're so inclined. Let them have that baby shower for you, and it's part of their involvement in everything that's happening. And some people consider it kind of hokey and they're not interested, but it's not only a good thing to do maybe on a personal level, but also on a professional level. Okay. The next phase, it would be, once your baby arrives and once you're now on maternity leave, okay, a number of things that are, recommended to, again, keep your involvement with your workplace. Stay in touch with your colleagues and your contacts, whether that's any entity that's outside of your workplace, vendors, partners. I'm not talking about on a daily basis. I'm talking about, here and there, dropping an email, answering emails that might come your way, remaining available to the extent that you're willing to do that. And I'll say this: it's less important that you be involved, X number of hours per week, than it is to let your employer and everyone else you work with know what your availability is, so it's something that they can bank on and expect, and then of course you should honor that. So even if you're only available, let's say 2 hours a week, that may not seem like a lot, but if you can do that and manage it and everyone knows that that's what you're going to do, that's better than saying, than trying to, be available, this inordinate number of hours, and when it's not really what you had in mind in terms of how you want to spend your time. But the idea here, is just to honor whatever it is that you say you're going to do. If you're going to be available from 8 in the morning until 10 in the morning, every Monday and Wednesday, then during that period of time, try to get some help with your home responsibilities. Try to be as available as possible during that period, so that if you're on a phone call or in a meeting, you don't get interrupted. And then also set firm boundaries. Don't be overly apologetic or feel badly if at the end of that period of time you need to say, okay, that's it for today. I'm going to have to move on to some other things now, and I'll be back online at such and such time, which is what you've agreed to. Okay. Something else that you can do while you're on maternity leave is make new contacts, and a number of different ways to do that, a number of different reasons to do that, really. Here's where you're kind of investing in let's call it an insurance plan for yourself. If over time you decide that you want to move on from your current employer, or if unfortunately your current employer is not, while you're out on maternity leave, you feel like they're not necessarily honoring their end of the bargain, and you feel like they may be moving on in a direction that's other than what you were hoping for. This is a great opportunity to spend just a little bit of time, updating your LinkedIn profile, using LinkedIn to make new contacts. LinkedIn's a great place, and other networking, tools as well online. But to find new opportunities for getting involved with professional groups, maybe taking on a short-term assignment that's really, again, at a level of commitment that you're comfortable with. Again, doing just a little bit can go a long way on maternity leave. When you step out and make new contacts and get involved with professional groups during your maternity leave, you know, it's a period of time when you can really focus on those new relationships. You know, individuals often find it really difficult to make new contacts, expand their network while they're working, you know, full-time or 100% capacity. So here's an opportunity to actually focus on a very important piece of one's career development, you know, when you actually might have a little bit more leverage and availability to do it. Okay. Of course, while you're out on maternity leave, it's a great move to keep your skills and therefore your resume up to date. A couple of different ways that you can do that. You know, and do it at your own pace. You know, you can take a class, meaning you can take an online course. A lot of the different strategies I'm talking about here today can be done, you know, without, you know, you don't necessarily have to travel. You don't have to go somewhere else. You can take an online class. You can learn something new on your own. You know, learn a new software skill, learn a new process for doing something at your work. You know, if you're thinking about changing careers, this might be an opportunity to learn about that new target industry. Have some informational interviews with people who work in the new career area, read about it, join a new professional association in that new area, start to expand your contacts, start to learn about trends in that new area. These are all things that you can, you know, when you're ready to come back, whenever that is, that you can talk about in networking meetings, in interviews, in a cover letter about, you know, things that you did. You know, how do you answer that big question we talked about, right? These are all things that you can talk to that show that you were staying involved while on an extended maternity leave. And these are some other ways that you can, you know, that you can continue to have an impact in your industry. You can work on a proposal, which means, you know, this is one thing you might arrange with your current employer is, you know, while I'm out, I'm going to give some thought to that rainy day project that we've been talking about for so long. You know, I'm going to work up a proposal that, you know, I'll send over to you, and it's something that I can work on when I come back to the office. So, you know, that's going to sort of, you know, quote unquote, force you to, you know, to reach out to colleagues, to stay involved with what's happening at work, et cetera, right? And it's an actual deliverable that you can, you know, share with your place of work, share with your employer, that, you know, it's something tangible that shows that you continue to be involved. You can start a blog, or you can contribute to other blogs in your space. You know, that sharing your opinion about trends in your industry. You know, also then, you know, reading about trends and what other thought leaders, you know, what thought leaders in your space are writing about, thinking about. Again, you know, this is something that you can do just a couple of hours here and there, and that you can then talk to and point to as something that you did while out. You can write an article. You can contribute to a book. You know, all these different ideas of, you know, how can you you know, stay involved, engaging in, again, we mentioned in LinkedIn, but other social media platforms, even just, you know, leaving a comment on an article or on a video that you've watched. And for many, you know, this could also double as an opportunity to kind of learn about social media if it's something that you haven't done before. You may not work in social media directly, but, you know, it's one of these skill sets that not everybody has yet, but, you know, over the next couple of years, it's going to be a skill that, you know, it's going to be ubiquitous. You know, everyone is going to need to be familiar with these tools and need to use them on some level in order to be considered, you know, kind of up to date or up to speed with their employment and with their field. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about, you know, your career documents. So kind of staying involved in these different ways while you're out on maternity leave. You know, the big bang for the buck is when you're coming back to work and you are developing or expanding on your resume and other career documents, how do you go about doing that? So let's talk about resume first. All of these different things we're talking about, whether it's a part-time work or a new skill that you've learned or, unpaid volunteer experience, getting involved with a professional association, all of these things are fodder, are up for grabs for adding to your resume as you're coming back to work, or either adding to your resume or, sharing with your current employer if they're kind of asking that big question, what have you been doing in the time off? So one of the reasons to do this is just to show, kind of show how you have improved your kind of total, total skill set. But another is also to, kind of begin to plug the gap in employment history, specifically if you've been out for an extended period of time. If you've been out for a couple of months on maternity leave, I think very few employers are going to look back and say, oh, you've been out so long, what have you been doing during this period of time? You need to kind of show me a little bit how you stayed involved. But if you've been out for, the better part of a year or several years, I think that question definitely starts to come up. And you want to be able to add these items to your resume, with dates to show, what you've been doing in the interim, and so that the first thing an employer, or a new employer, we don't want the first thing they see on your resume to be, oh, there's this gap in the last couple of years, because you might have a great story to tell in terms of how you've been spending your time, but if it's a cold contact, if it's not someone who you know already and they're getting to know you based on your resume, then we don't want to show them a gap very first thing, because that's not your best foot forward. The second item on this slide here, you want to carefully weigh the benefits of adding to your resume let's call it, non-relevant or less relevant experience, right? It's not unusual for someone who's been out of their main line of work for a period of time to take on a job, to kind of either stay busy, they're looking for something new to do, they are looking to make a little extra money on the side, so they start to do, let's call it, any old work, and they may be doing, they're engaging in activities and learning skills or using skills that are not really relevant to what they do full-time or what they do in their main line of work. And so the question is, do you include it on your resume just to have something there? And I would say, 80 or 90% of the time when I'm working with moms coming back from maternity leave or with other clients who are coming back from some work hiatus, the decision is made not to include that information, because there's also an argument to be made, which is, well, why were you doing something different? Does it take you away from the work that you've been doing? Do you actually have a different focus and you're not as committed to your primary line of work as you are saying that you are and as your other work history seems to say that you are? So there's kind of a balancing act there and an important decision that needs to be made. Should that experience find its way onto your resume or not? I would typically recommend, if you're earlier on in your maternity leave, try to get work that bears some relevance to your main line of work, so that it's a question that you don't even have to deal with, and you know right away that yes, I am going to include this on my resume at the end of the day. Should you mention caregiving on your resume? I see resumes from clients, original resumes that say, 2011 to present, stay-at-home mom, and I would say it's a case-by-case determination as to whether or not that's something that you want to do. It depends largely on, A, how long you've been out of work, and B, what else have you been doing aside from caring for your children during that period of time, that we can use to, quote-unquote, fill the gap on your resume. Whether, mentioning that you've been caring for your children it's definitely something that, we're going to take a look now at, cover letters. That's a more likely place to include the fact, to actually mention the fact that you've been caring for a child or children. But the idea is to do it in a way that's contextual, right? Not to lead with it, only because, as we mentioned earlier, it's likely not the very first thing that your current or future employer needs to hear about, or quite frankly wants to hear about, in terms of how you've been spending your time out of the office. In a moment we'll look at, I'll put a couple of kind of sentences or phrases up on screen so you can see some examples of how you might go about it. But it's not, you don't want to lead off your cover letter with, just want to let you know I've been out of work the last several years. This is what I've been doing with I've been caring for my children, and now I'm coming back to work. Okay, it's just not the best lead-in. But the main purpose of of your cover letter and oftentimes your interviews, or if you're looking for a new job after extended leave, is you're addressing that big question. You're going to use one or two paragraphs in your cover letter to point to the specific activities that you've been engaging in, and discuss their true value. Kind of draw the link, connect the dots for your reader. Why did you take on that activity? What was the purpose of you spending X number of hours per week doing it? And I would be straightforward with how much time you've spent on these activities, so that it doesn't seem like you're trying to pull the wool over someone's eyes and show that you've been spending a ton of full-time 30 hours a week doing something, when it's only been 5 hours a week, let's say. When I say only been, it's not that there's anything wrong with that, right? You were out on maternity leave, but it's just a matter of being honest and setting expectations. I think that the vast majority of women who are coming back from maternity leave are, quite frankly, not doing this, not taking this advice, and not spending too much time or any time finding relevant activities to engage in, to come back to work with. And it's I would say it's unfortunate. For the main reason is because I work with a lot of women who are coming back from extended leave, and they're anxious about it, they're nervous about it, they feel out of the loop. And the idea is to do enough that you don't, that you can come back and kind of say with confidence, here's how I spent my time while I've been while I've been out on maternity leave. Here is how I've been spending my time, and here's why it's important to you, current/future employer. You should also use your cover letter, and if you're in a job interview situation, you should also talk about your current availability. If you're coming back to work, are you coming back part-time, full-time, how many hours? Are you coming back on a telecommute basis? You should be upfront about all that as you're, making your way back to work. Okay, so some phrases that work. These are a couple of different options. There are many different ways to do this. I just wanted to show you a few to give you some examples of how you can address or start to address on a cover letter, in a job interview, in a networking situation that you've been out on leave. So in 2010, I left my full-time position in order to care for my child, and quick transition. During that time, I've taken on several intensive short-term projects, such as, etc. Okay, so it's honest, it's truthful, it's straightforward, and you're kind of diving right into the part that is most relevant to your reader. During my 12-month leave from full-time employment, I continued to build my portfolio of skills and experience by doing such and such. You'll sometimes see, sometimes I'll recommend putting a phrase, something like this, on a resume as well. This could be under that job listing, if you will, in quotes, of stay-at-home mom. In other words, in your experience section, it could be there. It could potentially be up in a summary section on a resume. But in most cases, if you've done something, if you've been engaged in some level of activity during your maternity leave, then I recommend leading with that and saving mention of maternity leave or mention of time off for the cover letter. One more example, I'm returning to work and I'm 100% or 50%, whatever it is, available to do whatever kind of work. I'm seeking a position with flexibility to work remotely 1 day per week. Again, this is just an example of how you would, very straightforward, explain to your target reader what it is that you want, what it is that you're able to do and can offer them. And one more thing I want to talk about, and then we're going to turn it over to you for some questions, is having how important it is to have a winning attitude. And this, again, if you're a mom returning to work after maternity leave, if you're someone who's been out of work for any reason over a period of time, and you're coming back now, these strategies that we're talking about here today, it's largely about having something to talk to feel good about the fact that you know what's going on in the workplace. First thing is no apologies, and this happens oftentimes with Resume Deli's clients. I see that they're feeling any combination of guilty or out of the loop, or like they don't belong back at work for whatever reasons. These are all issues of confidence. All issues of self-confidence. I would say in the vast majority of cases, if you do stay involved during your time off, you're going to feel more confident coming back. But under no circumstances should there be any type of apology in terms of, I'm sorry I was out on maternity leave. I'm sorry I took that time. I didn't mean to not be in the workforce the whole time. That's, this is part of life, and you're not the first person to go out on maternity leave and come back, and it's important that that be part of your brand, if you will, that you come back, ready to come back. And I'm just going to skip to the last item here, which is, there's an advantage for telecommuters, and being that this is the FlexJobs community I'm talking to today, if you're a telecommuter, you were already working from home some percentage of the time, before maternity leave, right? So, it's an advantage because they've already, your employer has already seen how effective you can be, working from home, having worked from home, balancing work and life in a way that's, different from how someone who's full-time in the office typically does it or needs to do it. So the fact that you have another responsibility at home at this point, shouldn't weigh so heavy on your employer's minds in terms of, is this person going to be able to keep up, or are they really going to be focused on work when they come back from maternity leave? Sure you will be. That should be what they're thinking, not only because you were able to stay involved to some degree while you were out on leave, but because you've done it, in the past. So okay, let's take a pause here. I'm hoping that you have some good questions that we can get to, and Bree, I'll turn it back over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Joseph. I think that was fantastic info, and we definitely have some questions coming in. So I'll just put it out there again. Feel free, if you have any questions, to put them in the chat box, and we'll try to get to, or the questions box, I should say, and we'll try to get to as many of those as possible. And before I get to the questions, I just wanted to say we'll be having a special offer at the end of the webinar, so please feel free to stick around through the question and answers, and you'll get the info on that special deal off of Resume Deli's awesome services, which certainly come in handy for a lot of job seekers. So stick around for information on that deal. There's a little teaser. But for now, let's get to the questions. So one question we do have, and it looks like our audience was kind of split, 50-50 of people who have not gone on maternity leave yet, and then people who have actually been on extended leave. So for about a year or more, we had kind of an even group at equal or opposite ends of the spectrum. So
right.
Here's one for people who've been out for a while. If I've been on leave for 5+ years, do I call it maternity leave or extended leave? What's sort of the language that you recommend in discussing that?
Sure. I mean, I wouldn't get too caught up on the language itself. It just more important is that you explain the reality of your situation. I'll often see, or I'll often help clients with cover letters, and we end up with something in the neighborhood of, I was out, went out on maternity leave. Well, let me take a step back. It really depends a little bit on, again, how you've been spending your time off. So if you have not been, working or involved in a professional group, or et cetera, then yes, you might call it extended maternity leave. I think that's a really fine and appropriate phrase. But if you've been doing other things, then I think I would pair it with, I went out on maternity leave, and during, kind of like some of my examples, during that period of time, I would kind of try to quickly couple the introduction of maternity leave with, some of the things, even at a high level, what you've been doing during that period of time, so that you're kind of labeling the period of time maternity leave and the other things. Maternity leave or extended maternity leave, you could also, I think if you just say, I took a break from work, I think that might raise some red flags in an employer. Like what it could mean any number of things. And it could, the employer's mind could travel in directions that, that trend toward, activities that they may not want to ask you about. Maybe it wasn't your choice to take the leave of absence. Is kind of where I'm going at. So I would let them know that it was maternity leave on one, in one level or another.
All right, thank you very much. And this next question comes from somebody at the other end of the spectrum who has not gone on leave yet. And I think this is something that a lot of women feel, so I think this will be a very good question for everybody. This person is concerned that if they left on maternity leave, they would have to hire, the company would have to hire someone else to do what they do because they're really the only person at the company who does that kind of work. Right. Part of the work is dealing with clients doing reviews. They're concerned that their work might be reassigned to another person if they have someone filling in for her. Basically just kind of addressing those concerns about someone taking your place when you're out on maternity leave. Are there any strategies where you can kind of make yourself indispensable so that people are looking forward to you returning versus looking for someone to replace you while you're out?
Yeah, yes. I talked about this a little bit at the start of the webinar, which is, if you can take take control of the situation to the extent possible, before you go out on maternity leave, and when you first tell your employer that you will be going out, you should come to the table with as detailed as possible a recommendation for how it's going to work, how, to what extent and in what way will you stay involved while you're out on maternity leave. And if the answer, look, of course the answer might be not at all, right? Like you don't intend to work, and that's obviously your choice. But if that's the case in particular, then you want to put your mark as much as you can on what I'm calling the succession planning. How is the company going to continue on while you're out? And if you have specialized skills and you need to hire someone else, then you should be involved in figuring out what skill set does that individual need. You might be involved in the recruiting process, in figuring out where to interview, where to find these candidates, interviewing them, helping to transition, and try to figure out a way that, again, if you're willing to stay involved while you're out, you build in something that they need. You don't give them everything, right? You don't hand over all the keys. You hand over most of them, so that they need to tap into your particular expertise while you're out, and you sort of become their de facto supervisor on some level while you're out. Of course, it has to be something that's palatable to you, right? That you're willing to do while you're out. But it's a really smart way, because it shows dedication while you're still in the office. Wow, she's really interested in making sure we don't go down the drain while she's out on maternity leave. And then it also it keeps you involved while you're out to some degree, so that the person who's taking over for you, even if they do a great job, it reflects back on you, because you set them up, you train them, you've been supervising them. So even if they decide to keep that person, maybe you come back in a different role that's a higher level potentially.
Great. Thank you very much. Yeah, I know that's one of those concerns that I think a lot of people share.
Yep.
So let's see. We have another one here talking about salaries and working from home, and if you're deciding to sort of switch jobs or switch careers when you are coming back from maternity leave, should maternity leave factor into your decision to or factor into your salary negotiations as something that you would take a lower salary because you've been out of the workforce, or is this, and I'm kind of thinking maybe it's tied to that confidence that you were talking about, and push for a regular salary that you deserve simply because of the salary that that particular job commands and the amount of experience you have, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, yeah. But I'm going to answer that question. Before I do, I just my mind was swirling with one more thought about the last question we were talking about in terms of what to do before you go out on maternity leave. And I just wanted to say quickly, it's so important to set that plan in motion while you're still in the office, while you still have that FaceTime, even if you're a remote worker, still it's FaceTime because you're still there. Trying to get that ball rolling and trying to remain involved once you're out on maternity leave, much more difficult to orchestrate. But let me turn my attention to the new question. And it's as always, salary negotiation, figuring out kind of what you're worth. It's based on a number of different factors, which the person who asked the question already mentioned many of them. One is level of experience. One is what is the market offering, and I have to come back to if you stay involved, continue to read, following trends in your space, maybe take on a small bit of work while you're on maternity leave. These are all things that should up the salary that you're looking to make, and that you're earning or meriting, I should say, when you come back from an extended leave, because it's more experience, right? If you have 10 years of experience and then go out on maternity leave for a couple of years, but you stay involved those couple of years and you do a little bit of work, now you have, let's say, 10.5 or 11 years of experience when you're coming back, as opposed to if you don't stay involved when you're out, then you have 10 years, and not only do you have a little less experience than you might have, but you also have older experience, so newer experience, newer skills tend to pay more, or merit a higher salary or higher hourly rate. More relevant experience pays more. And then there is that confidence piece, which the questioner mentioned, which is, if you've been involved and if you know what your company is up to, or what your target company is up to, and again, it may just be, spending a couple hours a week reading news about your industry or about particular companies that you're targeting. You come into an interview, even though you've been out of work for a couple of years, but you can talk, super intelligently about what that company is doing, what their goals are over the next 6 to 12 months, what partners they're trying to make, et cetera, et cetera. Like you really understand what they do and what they're doing. All of a sudden, those 2 years of non-work experience, not so important, right? Because you're coming in and you're clearly up to speed. It's not something you can do in the 3 days before a job interview, though, right? I'm talking about long-term, over the course of several months or years, reading the news, staying involved, really, really let it, it becomes intelligence, not just something you read the other day that you can, repeat back to somebody. It becomes really part of your understanding of your industry, your target industry.
Great. Thank you for addressing that. Another question that we have is, how can one make oneself much more attractive or competitive, especially for a telecommuting position when there are so many people applying?
Specifically coming back from maternity leave, do you think that's part of the question, Bree?
I think so, yes, yeah.
Yeah. I would say that pointing out, and this kind of goes for all telecommuters who are looking for a new position, but pointing out in smart ways in a cover letter, when interviewing, when networking, the things that you've done that only a telecommuter can do, such as making oneself available for meetings at all odd hours, working with different time zones, such as using particular, conducting meetings remotely, using technology remotely, working with individuals across time zones, across overseas remotely, pointing out that you've done all these things in the past, not only while you're on maternity leave, but also, prior to that, right? So this is how any telecommuter, these are strategies that any telecommuter might use. It's like anything else. You want to be able to prove that you've done it before and show that you've done a good job doing it. So on a resume, in a cover letter, there are smart ways, to show that you've done it before and succeeded. I know there's blog posts up on FlexJobs website, also on Resume Deli's website, that with some specific strategies and some more information about kind of tactically how to go about doing that.
Great, thank you very much. And we have one more question coming in, and this is sort of about job search tactics as well. How do you get started when you don't actually have a social media presence yet because your work is client-based and confidential, or you're on maternity leave? Another caveat to that is how do you address that leave on social media, on LinkedIn, and that sort of stuff, or do you not?
Okay, so I'm hearing a couple of different questions in there. The one about getting started on social media, if your work is confidential, that was the gist of it, right, Bree?
Yep, that's right.
Yeah. So, and this goes for resumes, cover letters, and social media, all of it. You can allude to a company or a line of work or a type of client without actually mentioning it by name. You can talk about things like the industry that client works in, or their size, or the geography and where they operate. Any of this information that you can share that's not going to give away who the client is, and that's comfortable, that you might kind of check in with your client to make sure that they're okay with you sharing that level of detail. But that those are typically reasonable ways to do that. I apologize, Bree. Could you rephrase the second half of the question?
Oh, yeah, no problem. And the second half had to do specifically with maternity leave and how to address that on your social media profiles or your professional social media profiles, if you should address it at all, even.
Yeah. I think I'm glad that whoever asked that question asked it, because the nature of the summary section on a LinkedIn profile, it really is one of the places in all, across all of the career documents, the resume, the cover letter, the letter of introduction, and now the LinkedIn profile. The summary of the LinkedIn profile is where you can really kind of roll the dice a little bit, take a little bit more of a risk, show a little bit more personality, and you can get, what I would call a little creative, and really kind of write something smart that shows that you've been on maternity leave, but that you've also been doing other things, and you can kind of, for lack of a better phrase, let it all hang out a little bit in that summary section, and you can talk a little bit more personally there. But we're not going to be able to get into details on this webinar, but it's a balancing act, right? There's a line you don't want to cross about getting too personal, but there's some really smart ways that you could do that there, to be completely honest with your reader, but also really hit them over the head with how experienced you are, how strong a telecommuter you are, how ready you are to come back to work, what you've done in the interim while you've been out of work that proves that. Yet I've also been out on maternity leave, so I would absolutely address it there if you've been out for plus or minus 6, 7, 8 months.
Great, thank you very much. And we have sort of a follow-up question to that as well. In relation to talking about writing professional samples, or just professional samples of your work and putting it out online, if you're on maternity leave and let's say you've been on leave for many months or years, Is it all right to sort of mock up samples that aren't necessarily from previous work that you've done, but that would be representative of your ability to do the work? And how do you, sort of tell employers these aren't real, these aren't from something that I, did for an employer, but this is an example of what I can do for you?
I think that's super smart. That's a great thing to do, and you can couch that sample, potentially as, it's something that you can share via social media. It's something that you can post on a website if you host one. That's a professional website, and then draw individuals' attention there. It's something you can talk about on LinkedIn. That's a great idea. You can do like a case study or a use case. It would be more of a use case because there's not an actual client that you're working with or a case that you're working with. But absolutely, and you can even pose it as you can be very straightforward about it. This is something that I think my industry, my colleagues can use. I took the time to do this research. It's an area of interest of mine. That's why I did it. And I hope you'll find it helpful. I'd love to get your feedback on it. You can even engage others in that way, right? I'd love to get your comments on it, get your feedback on it. Here's how you can get in touch with me. If this is something that you find interesting, then it's up to you. Please feel free to use it. Feel free to share it with others, or let's talk. Let's talk about how we can parlay this into something else. Here's my interests. So yeah, that's a great suggestion. It kind of falls into the category of unpaid self-starter projects that one might do while out on leave.
Yeah, great way to show initiative for sure.
Yeah,
and ability.
Absolutely, and you can do it you can do it at your own pace, right? There's no you're keeping the clock, right? You clock in and clock out whenever you want to with something like that.
Yep, exactly. And it looks that has brought us to the top of the hour. So, Joseph, do you want to talk about the special deal for everybody before we wrap it up? Yeah,
just a couple of other items before we check out here. I wanted to let you know, Resume Deli, like you can probably tell from the name, a large part of what we do is helping individuals with their resumes, cover letters, LinkedIn profiles, helping people making career transitions and career changes and coming back to work, to update their documents and get them feeling good about those documents. We also work with individuals on their job search strategy, so how to make that transition coming back to work, how to get ready for job interviews, etc. And the special deal is, if you are a FlexJobs member, you always save 20% on any Resume Deli service that you might want to engage in. You just go to the special partner offers section on your FlexJobs.com control panel, and there's a coupon code there that you can use on the Resume Deli website to get that 20% off. If you're not a FlexJobs member, you can still save 10% on any services you might like to hire us for, and that would be using coupon code, the word webinar. Use that anytime on the website, and you'll get 10% off. And I just want to quickly say thank you to everyone for hanging on and for asking your questions and for participating today and having me.
Yeah, thank you so much, Joseph. I think this was incredibly helpful for people, and hopefully people have a lot to do, or at least to think about as they're planning for maternity leave or their comeback. But best of luck to everyone in whatever stage you're in. Feel free to check out Resume Deli and FlexJobs for more great deals and information, of course. And thank you guys very much. Hope you have a great day.
Yep, you all have a good day. Thank you, Bree.
Thanks, Joseph. Bye, everybody.